Fiction or fantasy, writing an alternate history of the U.S.-Dakota War. In my upcoming novel, Reclaiming Minnesota, Dakota and Ojibwe soldiers join forces to defeat the U.S. Army and exile the white population of Minnesota from the borders of the state. This, of course, is fiction. It is an alternate history of what could have happened. The goal is to help readers rethink history and to reconsider what the results of our history mean for us today. The reality is a lot more complicated. At the time of the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862, the Dakota and Ojibwe were traditional enemies. Beginning around the year 1750 with the Battle of Isatis, the Dakota and Ojibwe fought a 100-year war for control over the regions of what are today northern and central Minnesota. It seems very unlikely, then, that they would join forces against a common enemy in 1862. However, after succeeding his father in 1847, the Mississippi bands of Ojibwe were led by Begonzagig the Younger, a charismatic, cunning, and unpredictable headman who was eager to regain the autonomy his people had lost. Then, with the emergence of Taoyataduta, or Little Crow, spokesman for the Dakota and military leader during the U.S.-Dakota War, rumors abound among the white populations that Begonzagig and Taoyataduta would collude against the United States. Some of these rumors came about because Begonzagig did in fact communicate with Taoyataduta and other Dakota leaders in the form of written correspondence. As noted by Ojibwe historian Anton Troyer, Begonzagig dictated his thoughts in Ojibwe, then had them translated into English and mailed. Little Crow then had Begonzagig's letters translated into Dakota and relayed to him orally. It's also known that when the war did break out against the white population of Minnesota, Begonzagig threatened to join the Dakota. Also, as reported by Andrew B. Stone in a Minopedia article, Begonzagig encouraged the Ojibwe to fight by spreading a false rumor that the U.S. government was planning to force all Ojibwe men to fight in the Civil War. And so, while there is evidence to suggest that collusion was possible, there is more evidence that such a partnership was unwise and therefore very unlikely. Though Begonzagig was indeed a charismatic leader with a growing following, he did not have the support of the Ojibwe leaders at Mille Lacs or Lake Superior. Rather, the Mille Lacs and Lake Superior leaders were set on supporting the U.S. government and strengthening their alliance with state and federal officials. This is not to suggest that they did not wish to reclaim their land and autonomy, but by 1862 they determined that the best approach was through conciliation with the whites. This took on several forms. Evidence that the Lake Superior Ojibwe did not support any kind of war effort against the United States can be found in the memoir Early Life Among the Indians by Benjamin G. Armstrong. Armstrong was a white man who moved to La Pointe on Madeline Island in the early 1840s. He married an Ojibwe woman and worked on behalf of the Ojibwe as an interpreter for many years. In his memoir, he notes that at the beginning of the Civil War, columns of Union soldiers began appearing everywhere. This startled the Lake Superior Ojibwe. Therefore, in order to show that they were peaceful and cooperative, Armstrong and a delegation of 9 Ojibwe leaders traveled to Washington, D.C. in early 1862 to meet with President Lincoln. Their goal was one of appeasement. Also, as Armstrong wrote, such a trip would give the delegation a rare chance to see the white soldiers and to thus impress upon their minds the futility of any further recourse to arms on their part. We know that the Ojibwe in the vicinity of Mille Lacs did not support the Dakota War effort, nor had any inclination to form an alliance, because at the outbreak of the war they actually protected the white settlements. When the war began on August 18, 1862, panic spread throughout the state, and people fled to the nearest city or fortification. In central Minnesota, people fled to Fort Ripley. There, as noted by historian Anthony Godfrey, Mille Lacs leaders arranged for some 700 to 750 warriors to march to Fort Ripley to highlight their support for the Americans. The Mille Lacs leaders actually condemned the actions of Begonzagig, who had orchestrated the U.S. Ojibwe conflict, and told the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, William Dole, that they would help put down the Dakota attacks. As a result, Commissioner Dole promised the Mille Lacs Ojibwe the protection of the U.S. government and told them that they could stay upon their lands without being molested if it was 1,000 years. The final and most obvious piece of evidence suggesting that the Ojibwe had no intention of colluding with the Dakota is demonstrated by a letter written September 2, 1862, by Chief Naga Nub and Chief Shin Guak, two leaders of the Fond du Lac Reservation, to Minnesota Governor Alexander Ramsey. In it, the two leaders expressed their support and gratitude for the U.S. government while condemning the actions of the Dakota. They went on not only to offer support in the war, but to beg for the chance, as they stated, to show that we are your friends and wish to serve you, to help you to preserve peace and tranquility among your children. In return, they wanted assurances that their families would be safe, that they would be allowed to fight in their traditional manner, and that they would receive all future annuities intended for the Dakota. They ended their letter with the bold reminder that, "Our fathers have drove them from this country, and if you had not come between us, we would have chased him still farther." With the benefit of hindsight, we know that the Ojibwe and Dakota did not join forces, and the Dakota were not able to overcome the U.S. Army during the U.S.-Dakota War. But it is clear that there was some political maneuvering at play. Whether it was Bagonzagig, Taoyataduta, or various Ojibwe leaders, they all sought to protect their interests in the best way they thought possible. My novel, Reclaiming Minnesota, is based on realities, but it's an alternative to what we know happened. It's an opportunity to reevaluate history from an imagined perspective, a perspective that, hopefully, broadens our view of the past and enlightens our view of the present.